War and Peace is an opera in two parts, sometimes arranged as 5 acts, by Sergei Prokofiev, a Russian libretto by the composer, and Mira Mendelson, based on the novel War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Although Tolstoy's work is classified as a novel, the 1812 invasion of Russia by the French was based on real-life events, and some real-life people appear as characters in both the novel and the opera, e.g.Prince Mikhail, Kutuzov and Napoleon Bonaparte. Composition history. Mendelson and Prokofiev's original scheme for the libretto of the opera envisaged 11 scenes, and Prokofiev began composing the music in the summer of 1942, spurred on by the German invasion of the Soviet Union, which began on June 22, 1941. The description, lyric dramatic scenes, in the libretto accurately suggests both a homage to Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin and an emphasis on individuals and their emotions rather than on the bigger picture of a country at war. A piano score was completed by the summer of 1942, and it was submitted to the Soviet Union's Committee on the Arts. The committee demanded that the Part 2 scenes needed a more patriotic and heroic emphasis. Prokofiev, who had wanted to see his masterpiece staged as quickly as possible, added marches, choruses, and other materials to Part 2 to satisfy the committee. In addition, he composed the choral epigraph, which emphasizes the Russian people's defiance in the face of the enemy. Performance history. Plans were drawn up for a 1943 premiere at the Bolshoi Theatre, Moscow, to be directed by Sergei Eisenstein and conducted by Samuil Samosud. Nothing came of this project, although a private performance of 8 scenes with piano accompaniment took place at the Moscow Actors Center on October 16, 1944, and a public concert performance of 9 scenes, conducted by Samosud, was given in the Great Hall of the Moscow Conservatory on June 7, 1945. The first staged performance was of a newly extended 7-scene version of Part 1, together with Scene 8, the first scene of Part 2. This took place on June 12, 1946, at the Maly Theatre in Leningrad, again conducted by Samosud. Part 2, also with an additional scene, was to be performed there in July 1947, but after the dress rehearsal no public performances were given, for reasons beyond the control of the theatre and the composer. Following the Zhukov Decree of February 1948, Prokofiev started work on a shortened single-evening version of the opera, at the same time making various revisions to his original scheme, although the 13-scene framework remained. This version was first performed on May 26, 1953, at the Teatro Comunale, Florence, conducted by Artur Rodzinski, 2 months after the composer's death. Scenes 2 and 9 were, however, omitted. The Russian premiere of this version was given at the Maly Theatre, Leningrad, on April 1, 1955, conducted by Eduard Grigourov, in this case with the omission of scenes 7 and 11. All 13 scenes were eventually first performed together on November 8, 1957, at the Stanislavsky Nemirovich Danchenko Theatre in Moscow, under the baton of Samosud's assistant Alexander Shavada. On December 15, 1959, the 13 scenes and epigraph were finally staged uncut at the Bolshoi Theatre, Moscow, although this was preceded in the United States by an NBC telecast conducted by Peter Herman Adler on January 13, 1957. The first British performance was a Leeds Festival concert performance at Leeds Town Hall on April 19, 1967. The first British staged performance was by Sadler's Wells Opera on October 11, 1972, and the first American staging by the Opera Company of Boston on May 8, 1974. In other countries, the 13-scene version of the opera was first performed in Germany and Bulgaria in 1957, Serbia in 1958, Croatia in 1961, the Czech Republic in 1962, France and Canada in 1967, Austria in 1971, Australia and Argentina in 1973, Spain in 1977 and the Netherlands in 1991. The Canadian Opera Company performed the opera as part of its 2008-09 season. Original version. In 2010, Prokofiev's original version of the opera, edited by Rita McAllister, was premiered in Glasgow, in a collaboration between Scottish Opera and the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. This briefer version represents Prokofiev's thoughts in 1941, before the various additions and amendments he assembled over the years. It runs some 90 minutes shorter than the later version. Roles. Other roles over 70 characters are listed in the libretto, and many singers usually play multiple roles. Other important characters are. Other named characters are. Unnamed characters are. The host at the ball and his majordomo, Prince Nikolai Bolkonsky's servants, his majordomo and an old servant and a housemaid, a French abbé, 2 Prussian generals, 2 staff officers, Prince Andrei's orderly adjutants to General Kumpans and Prince Eugene and to Marshal Murat, aides to Captain Napoleon and Kutuzov, and offstage orderly, a young workman, a shopkeeper, a French officer, 3 madmen, 2 French actresses, an escort. Synopsis. Part 1. The overture. The epigraph usually precedes the action. Andrei, who is a guest there, is depressed by the loss of his wife. Natasha, who also cannot sleep, looks out of her window and tells Sonia how beautiful the garden looks in the moonlight, and Andrei recovers his spirits. At a ball in St. Petersburg attended by the Tsar, Pierre encourages Andrei, who is attracted to Natasha, to ask her to dance. Natalie, also attracted to her, asks Helene to arrange an introduction. Count Rostov and Natasha visit Prince Nikolai's home. He is the father of Andrei, to whom she is engaged. Andrei has been abroad for a year. Princess Maria indicates that her father will not see them, and Count Rostov departs. However, the prince, dressed eccentrically and behaving boorishly, does appear, and Natasha realizes that he does not approve of the marriage. Helene tells Natasha that Natalie is attracted to her, and, after some hesitation, Natasha hears his declaration of love and agrees to meet him. Dolokhov has made the arrangements for his friend Anatol's elopement with Natasha. The coach driver Balaga, Dolokhov and Natalie drink to the escapade under the latter's mistress Matryoshka. Scene 6. Later that night, Natasha discovers that Sonia has given away her secret to Madame Akrazimova, with whom they are staying. Natalie and Dolokhov are sent away by Gavrila, and Akrazimova reduces Natasha to tears. Pierre arrives, reveals that Natalie is married, and agrees to ask Andrei to forgive Natasha. He shyly admits that he himself would want to marry her if he were free. Natasha makes her peace with Sonia. Scene 7. Later still, Helene is entertaining Natalie, Metavir and an abbé. Pierre, returning home, upbraids Natalie and demands that he leave Moscow immediately. He agrees, and Pierre is left alone to bemoan his own circumstances. Denisov arrives with the news that Napoleon and his army are crossing into Russia. War is inevitable. Part 2. The epigraph is usually performed here if it was not used at the start of Part 1. Amid preparations for the defense of Moscow, Andrei and Denisov discuss utilizing partisans to make life difficult for Napoleon's army. Pierre, wanting to observe the scene, arrives, and he and Andrei embrace, perhaps for the last time. Field Marshal Kutuzov offers Andrei a position on his staff, but Andrei prefers to go into battle with his own regiment. The battle starts. Scene 9. Later that day, Napoleon ponders his position, first refusing to commit more men, then agreeing. An unexploded cannonball lands at his feet and he kicks it away. Scene 10. 2 days later, Kutuzov and his generals are holding a council of war at Fili, near Smolensk. The army will be at risk if Moscow is to be defended to the last, but if the army retreats, Moscow will be at the mercy of the French. Kutuzov decides that only by retreating, and potentially sacrificing Moscow, will there be any hope of victory. Scene 11. Moscow is burning. The city is on fire because its citizens try to avoid a surrender. Pierre is caught up among some Muscovites, including the veteran Platon Karatev, who are accused by the French of fire-raising. As the asylum and theatre burn, lunatics and actresses flee, but Napoleon has to admit that the courage of the people has frustrated his plans. Scene 12. In a peasant's hut at Mytishye, the wounded Prince Andrei, delirious, has been evacuated with the Rostovs from Moscow. Natasha, who had been unaware that he was among her fellow evacuees, visits him. She tries to apologize for her conduct, but he again declares his love for her, and they sing of their happiness as Natasha reassures him that he will live. He falls asleep, and his heartbeat stops forever. On the road to Smolensk, the retreating French are escorting a group of prisoners through a snowstorm. Karatev cannot keep up and is shot, but Pierre and the others are rescued by the partisans. Denisov tells Pierre that Andrei is dead, but that Natasha is alive and well. Kutuzov and his men rejoice in the victory, and celebrate the indomitable will of the Russian people. Music. Broadly speaking, the music for Part 1 is lyrical and that for Part 2 is dramatic. There are a number of arias, though these are rarely freestanding and are usually preceded and/or followed by arios or short conversational passages. Dance music is prominent in Part 1, military music and choruses in Part 2. A number of themes, associated especially with Natasha, Andrei and Pierre, recur throughout the opera. Prokofiev borrowed Natasha's and Andrei's principal themes from incidental music that he had written for a dramatization of Pushkin's Eugene Onegin. Natasha's theme had been associated with Lenski, and Andrei's with Tatyana. Kutuzov's aria in Scene 10 reused music that Prokofiev had written for Eisenstein's film Ivan the Terrible. Instrumentation, chorus, orchestra, strings, percussion recordings.